So hi everyone, and thank you so much for joining us for another Spotlight Series training. Today we're going to be focusing on configuring LinkPoint Connect. My name is Jill McConaughey, and I'm LinkPoint 360's Director of Marketing and Client Relations. I also have our Professional Services Manager, Jana Vovcik, on the call with me today to help out with your questions. So before we get started, I'm going to review a few quick items. All attendees are muted and placed in listen-only mode for the duration of the webinar. If you have questions for us today, please feel free to type them up and send them to us in the questions section in the GoToWebinar panel. We are going to walk through a complete review of our configuration options, so I do encourage you to wait a bit to see if we address your question before we open up for the Q&A at the end of the session. There's a lot of content to show today. We're going to walk through as much as we can, but the questions are definitely welcome to make sure that you're following along and understanding everything. We are also recording this training, so we'll send a copy of this out to everybody once we have that ready. Another housekeeping item that I want to cover very briefly has to do with our upgrades. So today we're going to be working with our most current version of LinkPoint Connect. This is on our PC desktop version. By now you've probably heard us calling this our enhanced side panel or our version 7. And I know many of you have joined us for other sessions and are either already running the new version or going through the upgrade process. So you're all set for this training. If you're a current customer and you're not upgraded yet, or what I'm about to show you on my screens doesn't match what you're seeing on yours, you can email customersuccess@linkpoint360.com, and that'll give you a status on the rollout. We can talk through the process of getting you set up. If you have auto updates disabled or a custom setup, you will not have received the update automatically, but we are happy to help you test out the new version and get you set up with the upgrade if and when you're ready. So just because you don't have it now, it's not necessarily an error. We're just making sure that your setup has been preserved for you. And as always, upgrades are provided at no additional cost. So if you like what you see and you want to roll it out and haven't yet, absolutely reach out to us. We're happy to help. So as I mentioned, we are going to focus today on configuration. So to do this, we're going to be making an assumption that by now you're hopefully familiar with the core functionality of LinkPoint Connect, and that's the email recording, record creation. You have an inkling about what sync does and how it works. We have hosted separate Spotlight sessions on these topics, so if you missed one of those or you're not as familiar, don't worry. The videos are available on our site if you need to refer to them, and we'll make sure you have access to that as well, okay? So specifically today, we're going to be taking a look at general preference settings and then our advanced preference settings. And as I go through those, we'll make note as we go of some of the defaults and maybe some of the best practices that we recommend around those settings. We're going to touch on how to show or hide Salesforce objects. We automatically detect them, but maybe you want to tweak how we're actually displaying them. And that goes in hand with refining some of the fields that are displayed throughout the side panel. We'll talk a little bit about short forms in the context of our SnapForm and our record creation and updating. And then we'll go a little bit more in depth on the sync settings that we have available within our system. Okay, so we have a full agenda here. We're going to try to get through as much as possible. So with that, we're going to go ahead and get started. And I'm going to switch and move GoToWebinar out of the way. And now hopefully everyone is seeing my Outlook. When we talk about configuring LinkPoint Connect, we're going to be spending a lot of time in what we refer to as our Preferences pane. And this is where we control most of our email recording and record management functions. All of that's contained in our side panel, which you're seeing here on the right side of my screen. And I've made mine a bit larger for today and sort of zoomed the fonts in, so hopefully everyone can see them since we're going to be spending most of our time in a pretty narrow space today. So let's open the Preferences pane. And to do that, you're going to look in the bottom right corner of your side panel, and there's this icon with the 3 lines, looks like little slider bars, and we'll click that to pop out the Preferences pane. And there's a lot going on here, but we're going to take it one little section at a time and break it down for you. Let's start at the top and work our way down, and we'll start with the general preferences section, okay? So general preferences has a number of different settings, and again, you can control all this on a user level, and we're just going to walk through what these preferences do, and then you can choose what fits your workflow needs based on how your configuration needs to be set up. So this first option here for searching on Salesforce name fields. So the enhanced side panel looks at more than just a name field by default in Salesforce. So you can search for a variety of information to find the right records that you're looking for in your side panel. If that's returning way too many results for you, or you just want to only deal with record names, and I'll mouse over this and see if it works, you can check this option, and we're only going to search proper name fields from Salesforce. That didn't stay up for very long, but we can look at account name or first name, last name. And if you only want to work with those fields, you can check this box and that'll work. If you leave it unchecked, which is the default, we're going to search as many fields as possible to return as many results as possible. The second option here is just a nice to have. So when you are recording emails, there are little pop-ups that confirm that items have recorded or that certain actions have been completed. And if you don't want to see that success message, you can shut that off. Depends on your preferences and your screen clutter. This third option and the two controls with it are important to point out because they have to do with our follow-up process. So if you've been on our other sessions or you've been working with the software, you know that when you're recording an email, you can also create a follow-up, and you can create a task or an event. And this control tells us, A, if you want to even be able to do that. So if you don't want to create follow-ups, you can uncheck this and we can actually, it'll remove that option. So it's just one less thing for you to bump into. The default is that this is on, and also that you're going to work with tasks. If your follow-up process, if you prefer to create events instead, you can simply uncheck or switch it over here. There we go. As you need to work with events or tasks. So that's your default follow-up setting. And just so that everybody sees, we'll just leave here real quick. That's going to be when you have a recorded email, that's the control to create those follow-ups. So I'm pulling in that task option because I still have task selected. If I prefer as part of that follow-up to do an event, we switch. It's the same on inbound and outbound emails. Another question we get a lot is how to configure the attachment recording. So by default, we do not automatically record attachments. That keeps Salesforce data cleaner up front. We're not making any assumptions. But if you want to automatically record attachments, you can check this box to do so. There's a second control here. So if you want to always record attachments to Salesforce, but not all the little pesky Twitter icons or the little LinkedIn images, you can include different parameters here to exclude attachments. So in this case, and I'm using an asterisk here, hopefully everyone can see that, it's a little bit small, to exclude all of those PNG or image files that I've thought of. And you can stack these. I don't know that there's a limit, but you can start stacking these. Another use case is if you have a common document that's a full name that you always send out, maybe it's an NDA or a contract or a brochure name that's always the same and you use it a lot, you can add that in here as well. So you can choose to automatically work with those attachments. Just to point out again, when you have attachments, if that setting is off, you need to check the box to record the attachment. If that setting is on, you would see that the attachment was already selected here and you would lose the checkbox. So it would just indicate differently depending on your setting. Okay. Moving down the preferences section here, the next option helps to refine the results that show up in the side panel. So by default, we're going to have your email address, and this is my test user, Sally, and that makes sure that we're not looking up records or related items. Some people have their users in as contacts, and that can make things a little bit more cluttered. So by default, we're putting in your email address. You can, of course, choose to exclude your entire domain so that we're not querying and taking up space and time in the side panel, pulling up records related to your colleagues. You can certainly modify this. You can include more than one domain. So if you have a company that does have multiple domains, it can accommodate that as well. Okay. The next option, if you are familiar with our record management and creation tools, we have an option for LinkPoint connections. So that's going to automatically look at the records in Salesforce, compare them to the emails or the email addresses you have in Outlook, and then suggest that you may want to create new contacts from that. If that's a feature that you're not looking to leverage, you can go ahead and shut that off. So that's this control. And we try to collect information for complete email signatures or complete information. If you want the software to suggest to create records just based off an email address, if that's all you have about a person, but you want us to collect and capture that for you to look at later and work with, you can also have that selected. And that is the default configuration. We're going to try to help as best we can to aggregate the contacts or the leads that are missing from Salesforce. And then if you want to refine or turn that off, you can certainly do that. This is a great spot for me to stop and take a breath for a second, because all of the changes that you make in this panel, to save them or apply them, you're going to click that red X in the top and it'll sort of refresh that panel. It's also a really good best practice to check this last box here. That's going to just force the panel to check Salesforce for any changes, to check for any additional preference updates. It's sort of like a reboot for the side panel within Connect itself. So I always do recommend that you just go ahead and check this option, and then it'll sort of reprocess your changes. Okay, now I'm going to go ahead. We're just going to keep going. I'm going to collapse this section and we're going to pop down into the advanced preferences. Okay. The first one here is that you can at any point, I know we have the check boxes, but you can double click on records in the side panel to quick record. So if you want to do it that way instead of just aiming for a checkbox, you can turn that setting on here. The second option here is the option to launch an email that you've recorded in an edit mode in your browser. And what does that mean? It's a different way to change an item after you've recorded it. So let's pop out of this for a second. So this email is already recorded. And again, I know that because we have at least one record referenced down in the related to Salesforce section. And this box with the arrow coming out of it icon, that's your shortcut to go view that in Salesforce. If I click that, let's see if I've got myself logged in correctly here. You're going to see it in Salesforce as a completed task, or if you're using enhanced email, it'll take you to the enhanced email object record for that item. That setting that I just showed you, we'll pop back over to that so you can see it. I can get both of these to cooperate at the same time. There we go. So this setting, the difference here is, see how I'm just viewing this in sort of a read-only mode? If you enable this setting, this will be as if you were editing it. So this would be the screens that would pop up. Okay, so that's a good shortcut if you have a process or a workflow where you need to be single clicking to record emails in, but then you need to go and do some extra actions with your workflow requirements in Salesforce or make some changes. You can always shortcut in an edit mode. So it's a nice to have, and it is off by default. The next two options somewhat go hand in hand. So this option here to show all record fields in the search results is going to do essentially that. So it's going to show as many fields as we can about an item when it's in the top portion of your side panel. And I'll show you that in a second. This second option to show all of the fields in the selection list is how it's going to be displayed at the bottom of your side panel. And what does that mean? Let's look at that. So when we're looking at a record in the top, this is our search results. So this is everything the side panel has returned related to the email that we're on. And you can see here for Jake, and let's just pop this down for a second. There we go, on an account. We're getting a bunch of fields in our snapshot to view to tell us more about these records and help us decide if we want to interact with them or record to them. So that's viewing all of the fields. And that's usually a default that we want to keep on because that gives us insight into what we're working with. The selection at the bottom, see how this record for Fred has a lot less information showing than the selection for Jake, and they're both contacts. So this option at the bottom for the selections list is basically saying, keep this section small because it can get kind of cluttered. And once I add somebody, just give me the basic information about them so that when this gets all stacked up, it doesn't look visually cluttered. Okay. This is the default recommended setup so that we recommend seeing as much information as you have available at the top and then keeping it short and sweet at the bottom. We do include an option for customers who are interested to record the email as an attachment to Salesforce. So that is here if that's something that is of interest to your workflow. The next two options, and we're moving pretty quickly down this list, hopefully everyone's still with me, have to do with the inheriting references when you record an email. Okay, so by default, we're going to recommend who you might want to record an email to on a forward or a reply. If you don't want to do that, you can check these to not comply with that. And what does that look like? Well, this email's been recorded to 2 people already. And if I go ahead here and I reply, I'm just going to go ahead and pop this out so it's easier for me to work with. And bring the side panel back and make it bigger. You can tell I was working on a laptop before. Okay. Other than the resizing I did, all I did was hit reply on a previously recorded email string. And you can see that by default, the side panel over here and the bottom, it's recommending or bringing over those references. So it's saying, because you recorded to Fred and Jake before, you're probably going to want to do that here. If you don't want these to be pre-populated, then you're going to want to check those options in the Preferences pane. And let's just bring that back. Okay. There we go. So if you want to remove those from your replies or your forwards, and you can control them separately, maybe your workflow is different on a forward than a reply where it might make more sense, you can go ahead and check those boxes. This last option, I think, is one of our most requested configuration questions, and that's you need to check this box to be able to edit the subject and body of an email when you're recording it. So this is a really popular feature, but it's actually off by default. So with this checked, what that lets you do, let's bring that reply back up, is when I'm working with an email and I want to change how it looks when it's recorded to Salesforce, you have this big orange button in the bottom of your side panel. If you don't have that setting turned on, you may not see the big orange button. This is where we come in to edit the subject line and the body of the email for Salesforce. So if you're looking to do that process and you're not seeing what you're seeing here on my screen with that ability, that's the setting that you're going to be looking for. So again, that's in Preferences Advanced, and it's this last option here to allow me to edit the subject and body fields. That's not something you're working with? That's great, you're already set because it's probably off. All right. I know I'm moving through these a bit quickly, but we have a pretty long list, and I'm hoping that most of these are self-explanatory. If there are questions, we'll revisit them toward the end of the presentation. The good news is, I think, even though there are, when you pop these open, it looks kind of like a lot, they are pretty straightforward, so hopefully this is not too overwhelming for everybody. The third section here in the preferences is some support resources that I just like to point out that they're here. I'm not sure if a lot of people are aware of them, but if you're working with our support team, they may ask you to forward your logs so they can help troubleshoot your setup. And this link is one of the places you can do that from. So it's just nice to know that it's there. You can also click here and you can chat. It'll take you out to our chat with our support team. So if you're kind of clicking around and not sure what to do, you can always go ahead and put that through to them from this place instead of just trying to go to our website. This last one here is a link to open our assist window, and that's going to come in handy when we start talking about syncing in a little bit. So just, again, keep that in the back of your mind, that that's an available option there in your support resources section. Okay. The rest of the options in my preferences pane, and it does look like quite a few, are specific settings that are going to apply to each of your Salesforce object configurations. I'm going to work off of contacts today, just since it's the most familiar to me, and a lot of people seem to work with them, but the same general options and configuration, they're going to apply for any object you have access to. Another thing I want to remind everyone, again, is your object list is going to look different than mine. We always let users work with whichever standard and custom objects they have access to in Salesforce. So you're going to have custom objects, you're going to have different levels of access to things compared to me or compared to colleagues. That's perfectly correct. So just kind of keep in mind that these are general thoughts around object configuration. So let's open one of these and see what happens. All right, and we'll make sure I'll scooch this up so that hopefully everyone can see that okay. So there are a few general buckets of controls in here, even though it's very checkbox heavy, and we're going to start at the top. So this first one, to search, create, and edit records with respect to contacts. What does it mean? This is basically where you turn an object on and off. So if you did not work with contacts, or maybe a better use case would be cases, and you didn't want to see it in your side panel, you didn't want to search or have cases come up or contacts come up in your search results, you don't need to edit or update those records. You can uncheck that here and we will shut down that object for you. Okay, so come through your list and right away, you don't even have to open them. You can see there's these check boxes here. You could pretty quickly run through and just tweak the on and off for the objects that we've automatically detected. The second option here just tells the side panel your viewing preferences. So for objects you work with a lot, and for me that's contacts, you may want this checkbox here to automatically expand in the search results. And what that looks like, let's leave this and come back. And I'm going to actually remove this just so you can see. My side panel configuration, I have a lot of objects and they're all sort of collapsed here. See how there's just the one header row for each one? But I work with contacts all of the time. So when I'm moving between emails, this section is always expanded for me. So that's what we're talking about with the expanding and the collapsing, okay? If you find that you're constantly working with opportunities or another object and you have to keep clicking to pop it open, you may want to go ahead and find the configuration option to make sure that's expanded for you. So that's what we mean by that. The last two groupings here are fields and related data. And everything I'm going to say basically applies to everything you will see, and your list of fields or related data will look different, maybe bigger or smaller. But the field visibility, this tells us which fields you want to see displayed in your side panel when you're viewing a record, okay? We're getting this list from Salesforce, and we'll talk in a second about where that list comes from. But to start with, we're seeing these fields, and I'll show you where, right here on a contact. So as long as I have values, and for this one's blank, but as long as I have values, these are the fields that I'm saying I want visible. If I don't need to work with a certain field, maybe I don't know what account site does, so I don't need it, just uncheck it and we won't display that in your side panel. So this is where you turn on and off the fields you have available to you. Now, what populates this list? These are coming from your search layout in Salesforce. And I don't know, some of you may or may not be Salesforce admins, and I'm not a Salesforce admin. But just to show you so you can kind of compare, I'm going to pull Salesforce up and let's switch over. So I'm on contacts, so I'm showing you my contact table in Salesforce and see how I have a row here that's listing all the fields available to me when I'm viewing and searching for contacts. These names, the account name, account site, phone, etc., that matches this list right here. Okay? So that's where the fields are coming from that we're dynamically pulling from Salesforce. If you need or want to change that, you may need to speak with your Salesforce admin. So that's not, if you need to add a field here, maybe for fax, if anybody faxes anymore, and you're not seeing it here, that's because it's not being reflected in this particular configuration in Salesforce. Okay, so that's not something we can change for you, but it's something that can be changed on the Salesforce side. Related, unrelated is your related data. So again, on contacts, back in our preferences pane, we have this second column of related data. And these are the available related content areas from Salesforce that you can view with respect to contacts. And what does that mean? Let's see if this is working for me today on my machine. When you want to see more information about a record, you can click in and view the record details. So now I'm seeing for Fred, and I can expand these, activity history, cases, some notes, some open activities. Yours will look different. Where is this list coming from? It's coming from, in part, this list right here. So those sections I just rattled off are mirroring where there's data, because if it's blank in Salesforce, it'll be blank. We're mirroring that list here. If you want to remove some of these from showing up when you're looking at record details for a particular record, like a contact, you can uncheck the box. Where does this list come from? Well, we're mirroring Salesforce again. So let's go back in. Let's actually look at a contact, and hopefully you can see here each of these sections that I have available to me. They should start to look very familiar because we're pulling this list directly from Salesforce. So if you don't have a certain record type related into your contact, for example, and you're not going to see it here, then you're not going to see it as an option in your side panel preferences. Okay? So that's where we're pulling that information from. And again, if you've got some sort of workflow issues around that, you'll need to likely talk to your Salesforce admin, because that's getting into layouts and how contacts work in Salesforce in that example. All right. While we're talking about Salesforce itself and how it affects or can impact your configuration settings, I do want to take some time to talk about SnapForms and how they're generated. So we've talked about how we're looking automatically at Salesforce. We're getting this list of all of your objects based on your level of access. We're pulling in all the fields and the related data based off of A, your level of access, and B, how Salesforce is configured. So when you pull open a SnapForm, and let's just do that. And again, SnapForms, top right corner. Your list will look different than mine, but let's play with contact because that's what we've been talking about so much here. Let me move this so that it's in the middle of my screen. Okay. These fields come from Salesforce also, and they're going to reflect whatever you have available to you when you're creating or editing Salesforce records. So if you're doing a create new, if you're using our drag and drop or our connections feature, it should all be the same experience for you, just as if you were creating it in Salesforce. So it's the same field, same access. If you need these changed, you're going to have to speak with a Salesforce admin about changes to your record creation process per record in Salesforce, and that may or may not be a road you want to go down, but that's where these come from. And I wanted to make sure everyone understood. That's why I always say that yours are always going to look different than mine. And again, required fields, big red line, can't pass go without those. Now, because of where we pull in that data from, one thing that gets asked a lot is, can I please make this smaller or shorter? There's way too many fields here. And I'm going to talk very briefly, just so that you all have a reference point, about short forms. So because SnapForms typically display so many fields, we do offer an option. I'm going to check this box that I have here, and then we'll talk about how I got this. to view a much shorter version of that form. And that's quite frankly very refreshing, right? I just have just the fields I think that I need to work with to move forward with my process. So that's much less visual clutter than this. Okay? And some people need this view, and that's perfectly fine. How do you create a short form? I'm going to give you the very high level view of this without walking through the entire process because it's a Salesforce configuration. Okay? So to do that, you're going to want to think of the record you're working with, and we've been talking about contacts, so that's where I am in Salesforce. And you're going to want to create a new list view in Salesforce, and you may or may not have the option to do that depending on your Salesforce permissions, but we're looking at list controls new. You'll walk through the process to create this, but there are a few standout things you need to keep in mind. And the first is that the view name has to start with LP360 underscore SnapForm, just like mine does. You can end it however you want. I keep things simple and just name it with what it is. It's easier for me to keep track of what I'm doing when I'm in Salesforce. Okay, so you're going to create your list view with a name that we're going to be able to find in our system. If you want to share the view with more than just yourself, you're going to want to check that visibility setting when you configure this so that it's not just private to you. You can keep it private, but if you're doing this for a team, you can make it available at different levels depending on your level of access. In the list view controls, where you get to set your filters and your fields, and you can sort of add and subtract. See how I have mine already configured with this, again, the table headers, basically, the name, account, phone, email, title. I put owner alias just because. We're going to look at the fields you choose to display here, and that's what we're going to use. Did I leave this open? I did. There we go. That's what we're going to use to display fields on your short form. So see how my fields here match the fields that are listed here. And this one's not really editable, so it's not showing. Something to keep in mind when you're doing this, if you miss a required field, so if your view in Salesforce does not include all of your required fields for that record, and you configure this, it will not let you in our app move forward and save without all of the required fields. What does this mean? I have account name here. That's required. Everything looks great. But when I expand, see how I have last name as required? When I shrink it back down, I'm not including it. If I filled this out and click the green check, it's not going to actually let me save the contact because we follow your Salesforce rules. So if you choose to go down this route, we do have some help docs on this if it's something you want to revisit later. You're going to need to make sure that your view for your short form here includes all of your required fields. Okay? Now, as a last step, let's say you've created this brand new SnapForm view for your short form criteria and you've done all the work and you come into our app and you don't see your changes. That's expected because you need to come into your preferences. You need to go to your general preferences. And you need to tell our app in this last bottom option, remember I said we need to refresh it sometimes, we're going to want to rediscover your Salesforce environment and look for any changes you make to any Salesforce settings. So whether you're changing fields that are available on a SnapForm or what you're exposing to your users or how you're configuring a short form, if you've made a change, and if you want to see that change in real time, you're going to want to check this box and sort of give an app a refresh. This does run, I think it's like once every 24 hours on its own, so you'll get the changes eventually, but if you've just done it and you're excited to use it, come in here and check this box and then close your pane to make sure that you get those changes. All right, hopefully I still have everyone with me. Configuration webinars are always quite a mouthful of terms and ins and outs, and things don't always apply to everyone, but we've done the bulk of the work for our preferences pane now, so we can take a breath. We're actually going to leave the side panel and talk about some of the remaining configuration settings, and those are in our LinkPoint Assist window. The one way to get there, remember, you can launch it from your support section. You can also find your LinkPoint icon in your system tray. Mine's nested. Here it is. Right-click it and click Configure. Both roads lead to the same box. All right. So now that we're here, we'll just walk through some of the configurations that you have. Very quickly, when you hear us talk about entering your license key, this is where you do that if you haven't already, and click Verify. Remember, nothing will work if you're not connected to Salesforce. So if you're not connected, you'll need to come in here and connect. So those are your two configuration options just for initial setup. You'll see that I have two remaining configuration components, and we're going to start with the first one, which is our tracker component. Tracker lets you track email opens on your outbound emails. And just so you know, I believe this feature is off by default, but this is where you can come to enable or turn that on. We do have other help articles and guides for how to use Tracker. There are several different buttons and places you can interact with it in the side panel. You do have this shortcut icon or big button if you need to launch your window from here, so you can certainly do that. I'm just going to talk very briefly about the settings since we're on the configuration topic today. We talked about turning it on, so there's your enable checkbox. You can turn it on, but then you can choose whether or not you want to always just track all emails. So there's your track all by default. If you leave that off, you'll just have an option in your side panel on an outbound email to one-off track an email. So it's just a workflow preference, but this is where you come to always track all of your emails and sort of not have to think about that. If you want to be alerted when someone actually opens an email that you're tracking, make sure this box is checked. It'll help to serve up those pop-ups. And this accompanying drop down here actually tells us how long to show you that pop-up. So if you're sending out lots of emails and they're all tracked, you might not want constant popping up. That might be a little bit of visual overkill. If you're using it a little less heavily, you can come in here and keep it on, but maybe show it for a little less, show it for longer. Just sort of that way you know how your emails are being interacted with. Quick reminder, any change you make in LinkPoint Assist, you have to click Apply. Make sure your changes are saved. Okay? And again, that's just the high-level configuration. This is how you make sure your tracker is on and working how you want. We have help articles to talk you through how to actually work with the tracker data and find it in your side panel. Last but not least, I think we're okay on time and we can still do Q&A, is our sync settings. And sync settings at a high level are available for calendars, contacts, and tasks. You can set different settings for different processes. I'm going to stop right there and just mention some of you may not have access to this, and that's not an error. For some clients, we customize these ahead of time. We preset them. We lock those settings so you can't change them. So if yours looks a little bit different than mine, it could be because we're following your workflow requirements for your company. But for a basic user coming in here, it should look very similar to mine. So you choose what you want to work with. So let's say calendar. You tell us how many days back on your calendar you want us to look for data and how far forward you want us to look. By default, we do not sync private items on your calendar, so that's the Outlook function to click and actually set something as private. If you want to sync private items, check the box. The last 6 options down here handle whether or not your sync is bidirectional. So you can leave it like this, and we'll just set up Salesforce and Outlook to mirror each other. If you're doing something more, let's say with a contact sync, you might not want to let our system delete your Salesforce contacts in case there's a problem or a match issue or you accidentally delete someone from Outlook. So you don't have to have it necessarily be bidirectional for creating, updating, and deleting. But it's good to know the options are here. Once you've actually selected to work with a sync, you can switch tabs and turn it on to run automatically in the background if you prefer. So there's your auto syncing options. and you can tell our system how often to run that background sync for you. We typically recommend once an hour, once every 2 hours, just so that the data has time to kind of catch up with itself. You can change when the sync runs. Just because you do something at 9 o'clock at night doesn't mean we won't sync it. We just won't run the sync until 9 a.m. the next day. So this is your sync window. Remember that your computer needs to be on. So if your sync is supposed to be running and it's 2 p.m. and you shut it off to take a lunch break, the sync will just resume the next time you turn your computer on and the frequency hits. Okay? I'm just going to back out of that so my sync doesn't run, but the sync settings are fairly straightforward. We do offer some extra configuration. If you need to tweak this a little bit, you can talk with customer success and our professional services team. We can kind of help with best practices if you need a little bit more of a refined approach to one or more of these. And I do want to mention that this does not affect snap recording. So let's just close this so you know what I'm talking about. Let's go to a calendar item. So if you have your sync off and you want to create a new meeting with someone, what you'll notice very briefly here is that I have a side panel on my event record in Outlook. So you can, let's find Fred. Sometimes my computer's starting to slow down here, so let's home stretch. So you can choose to run your sync, and it would sync this whether or not you've related it to anything. I probably shut something off I shouldn't have, clicking around. There we go. All right. So you can just leave it like this and the sync will run. If you start getting fancy and relating your events and selecting all of the fields, we've talked about how to go ahead and relate with some of these fields, so I'm glossing over this screen. But once you've gone ahead and done your relationships, our sync will pick up all that relationship data as well. If you have sync shut off, you can still one-off record an event like this. So that's our snap recording for events. Okay, so the syncing is compatible with some of these field configurations if you are interested or you have those enabled. And if you just don't want to touch syncing because that box gave you a headache, you can just still one-off go ahead and record an event as needed. Thank you to everyone who sat through that very long, very kind of quick configuration overview. That is everything I had on my agenda. So that's the good news. There was a lot, but we made it. I'm going to switch gears now and check out some of the questions that have come through. I know that was a lot of information, and I know I talked a bit quickly. Okay, so if you have questions, feel free. We'll take a deep breath. You can go ahead and enter those in the questions section in the GoToWebinar panel. We want to make sure that this makes sense for you, that you have a good understanding, not just of how to record and create things, but how to make it fit your workflow needs so you can get the most out of the software. So if you have a question and you haven't sent it my way, do that now. I'm going to take 1 second and actually read through the questions and see if there's anything I haven't covered yet. So just give me 1 moment here. Let's see. Oh, you're welcome, Antonio. Glad that you liked. Thanks for hanging in there with me. I think I talked for about 40 minutes there. Let's see. Can I do anything to enlarge the check marks or the copy or the buttons in the windows? Somewhat. That's a half answer, I know. So I told you at the very, very, very beginning that I've made my side panel look bigger, and it's a little hard to show you because it involves my keyboard and mouse. But if you hold down the control key on your keyboard and you use your mouse scroll wheel in the middle, see how, hopefully you're seeing this, it's getting like massive and then less massive. So that's how you can sort of change the zoom factor. As you're seeing in the bottom, it's giving me a percentage. That's how you can make it bigger or smaller. Remember, you can always collapse this too if you just need some space, especially if you're on a small computer monitor, and then pop it back out for when you need it. So that's the first question. So hopefully that helps the zoom factor does apply to like the whole thing, so I can't come in here and make this font particularly different or bigger, but hopefully maybe zooming will help you there. Let me go ahead and check out the next question. And this is a great question for my colleague, Yana. We're being asked about global changes. So yes, everything I just did was as me, as Sally, as a user. But Yana, can you speak to how we handle it if there are global changes and what can be done across an entire account versus what has to be done locally?
Hello, everyone. Yeah, I'll be glad to answer that. It will depend on the setting. For most what Jill explained, we can set it on the account and apply it globally. But certain things, for example, the object, how we discovered with Salesforce, it's done automatically for each user because it follows Salesforce security model for each user.
Thanks, Yana. And I see I'm kind of double multitasking here. I see a few different people have asked that question. So maybe a good follow-up would be if Mark and Thomas and if any of the others who are sort of chiming in, if you have specific changes in mind, go ahead and email customer success at linkpoint360.com and we'll take a look at what exactly you're trying to get at, and Yana will go in and take a look and help narrow down and explain for you what we can do versus what we can sort of prompt you to maybe change in Salesforce to accommodate that. Okay. From a deployment option standpoint, I don't believe anything has changed. So you can install this application locally. So most of our end users just sort of download the file and install it, and it just sort of works. That was the very non-technical explanation. We do still support virtual desktop environments like Citrix, Terminal Services, other brands of the same thing. We can provide packages for you. So if you're doing a silent install or some sort of mass deployment, so all of those options are still available with this enhanced side panel version. Okay. Let's see. The questions will come later when we try to, absolutely, yep. You're all gonna have questions later, and I'm gonna close with some extra resources for when we all hang up, so don't worry about that. Patrick, this one's another great question for Yana. Talking about opportunity preferences, and I think this goes into the filtering questions we sometimes get, Yana. Can users exclude certain criteria for records? Like, can you not show closed ops and sort them by date? And I think I know the answer, but I'm going to let you start.
Yes, we have the ability to sort and filter on all the objects.
And that's going to be, if I'm right, that's going to be the right click. So I've right clicked.
Right, the right click, yeah, that gives you the option to sort. And filter is more buried down in the configuration, and we'll have to set it up for you because we'll have to pick the fields that you want to sort on and the criteria and then set that off.
Okay, great. So Patrick and or anyone else that rang a bell with, right click on any of these sort of section headers to get to your actual sorting options. And then if you have certain criteria, like I want to see all my opportunities unless they're purple or something like that, Yana and her team can work with you to bring those extra filters to life. Okay, but it is supported, so that's relatively good news.
Right, and I just wanted to mention that the sorting order comes directly from Salesforce from your search layout, so you can control it in Salesforce. So right now, Jill, in your Salesforce, all the opportunities are sorted by name. If you change that in Salesforce, it'll be reflected in LinkPoint as well. So the sort will be on a different field.
And I'm switching to contacts just because I have that ready to show. So I've right-clicked contact header, and you see how name is already selected. If what I'm understanding, if we go back in here real quick and we go look at this one, I'm sorting based on the name column here. So that's where we're pulling that from. Is that correct, Yana?
Correct. Would be more from the search layout. This is your recently viewed layout, but if you search for Fred Johnson manually and whatever comes up, that search layout that'll come up, that's where the sort order is coming from. There you go.
There we go. All right. That's my I learned something new for the day, which is excellent. So we've all gone in and we've learned where that sorting is coming from. I knew it was there. I didn't know what was feeding into it. So that's excellent. Put that one on my list. Let's just see, because we're coming up on time, but I think we're still good. If there's anything else, give everyone another minute. I know, again, it was sort of info overload, but I want to make sure that I've answered everything that I can right now. And I'm scanning through. I guess as a follow-up, Yana, just to clarify, when we're setting some of those settings, like, and for example, like domain exclusions and some of the things in the panel preferences, when we talk about whether or not those can be set globally or not, are you also talking about whether or not those can be locked down so users cannot override them?
That can also be done. Well, we can set them for everyone on the account, and then separately we can make sure that those settings are propagated every day. So during the day, users might make changes or, assign something else, but tomorrow when we check the license, we will reset everything to ground zero with all the company settings. So that can be done.
Okay, so
just because everything is super configurable and users have access to everything, they can go in and make their own changes and customize it to the way they want to work with it. But we still have control with the license key access.
right, and most of our clients I know get more particular about that LinkPoint Assist box that I showed everyone and some of the sync settings, and those we can pre-configure, out lock, provide that level of access, because some people get a little nervous around things like contact sync. Maybe some companies just do not want users touching that at all because it could just get frightening. Other people are really comfortable with it. So again, to Yana's point, there sounds like there's a lot of flexibility around that, even with the side panel. It just depends on what you're trying to achieve. So I am seeing a bunch of questions in that vein, and would probably recommend if you've, I can't remember if some of these folks have upgraded yet or are considering it. In any event, you can go ahead and ask our team, for a little bit more specific guidance. And just to reiterate, because I'm getting asked this again, we can help you filter. So for example, excluding the closed opportunities, Patrick, my understanding is that's something we just have to help you set up. So I'll make a note of that, or you can reach out. I think we might have already started your upgrade. So if you're already working with myself or with Yana, you just find those email threads and ask us, and we'll help get that set up wherever we can for you. Okay? All right. It looks like I've caught up with all the questions, and we're just about on time. So before we wrap up, I always go back. Let's see if my computer will cooperate. There we go, to my PowerPoint, because I want to finish on some extra resources, because if you are like me, this webinar will end and you'll come up with more questions. Or some of you were even saying, you're good for now, but later when you go in to actually make those adjustments, you might have questions. That's perfectly fine. I want to make sure you know where to get extra help when you go to do some of these things we've talked about. So you have your online knowledge base. You can go there, you can read articles, there's screenshots, there's step-by-steps. All of the descriptions for all of those fields that I rattled off, it's all in the Edit Preferences article on the knowledge base. So if you need help finding that, contact information toward the end of the slide. We might be wrapping up our training sessions. I'll have to check our schedule, but the news and events page, if we don't have any live ones scheduled, also has some links to the past sessions we've done. We'll make sure we send those links out to everybody as well, so you can go back and look at how to do the email recording or contact creation for which these configurations apply. And of course, last but not least, technical issues and support. Email support. It creates a case. Someone will help you directly. That's the quickest way to get sort of instant help in a way. Questions about your upgrade. I don't have the new version yet. Where am I in my rollout? What's a best practice? I need a resource for something. That's me and my team. So you can email customer success at linkpoint360.com. You'll get me and we will get you up and running with whatever else you need. All right. Thank you all. Last but not least, one more time for joining me today. I know it was a lot of information. The questions were great. I really hope that this helped shed some light on the flexibility and control that you have over the software, but also where our teams can pop in and Yana and I can provide support for you as well. So thanks again for joining me today, and I hope that this session helped you get even more out of your LinkPoint Connect experience.